Welcome to The Founder's Mind, a podcast powered by the Goddard Group. This is your host, Adam Muchler. On this episode, we have David Schnurman, founder and CEO of Lawline and author of The Fast Forward Mindset. Listen in as David shares his experience in growing an online education platform for lawyers, running marathons, what led him to write his book, The Fast Forward Mindset, and much more. Hey, David. Welcome to The Founder's Mind.
Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to dive into the conversation and learn about you and Lawline and I think a couple more things that you're up to.
Let's do it.
I know you and I had an initial conversation, but it would be great to hear in your words, not mine, who you are, what you're up to, what you're working on.
Sure. So I am somebody who's obsessed with lifelong learning. I call that's short for self-help addict. And I just love taking in information. And when I get that information, trying to organize it in a way that's easy for other people to understand and then sharing it. And so right now, this podcast is one form of hopefully I'll be able to take some things that I've learned over the past 11 years in entrepreneurship and 41 years of life to digest it down to some nuggets that, will relate to some people. I'm the CEO of Lawline. We are the largest provider of online continuing legal education for attorneys. There's 1 million attorneys in the country. It's mandatory for them to take courses to keep up with the law. We make it super easy. We've been called like the Audible for law because we have an app that's just like Audible, and that's just
nice.
To understand it. I'm also the president of Entrepreneurs Organization in New York. There's 13,000 members worldwide. Again, that goes back to my philosophy of wanting to help other entrepreneurs and inspire them and to learn. I'm a big believer teaching is the best form of learning. In order to communicate something effectively, you need to know it pretty well. And that's why even just talking on podcasts, it really is, as you know, just great practice for understanding your messaging. And then finally, I am the author of an upcoming book called The Fast Forward Mindset. And it was built out of my own trials and tribulations of figuring out, once I've had some success, I hit a comfort zone, and it was figuring out how to once again get out of that comfort zone, not just once, but over and over again, and more importantly, stay there longer. But the key about the book was it wasn't just about getting out of the comfort zone for doing sake. It was about the bigger purpose of it. And for me, and I think for many people, it's about to fast forwarding your impact on the world around you. And to me, that is the purpose in my mind of getting out of my comfort zone, because what I would hate in 20 or 30 years is to look back and have regret, not about what I didn't achieve, but what I didn't try to accomplish in terms of my impact.
I love that. And we talked about that a bit before, so I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit in this conversation. I think you're doing a lot. Lawline, you've been doing, just based on LinkedIn, for a little over a decade. So you're deep into it.
Yeah. I started it in law school. I had actually started a TV show for entrepreneurs. That was before podcasting really existed. I had a public access TV show, and I was interviewing entrepreneurs. And I realized I can actually take that camera and put it on attorneys and turn those into courses. And so it was in law school where I was able to transform the interviews for entrepreneurs to courses for lawyers. And we've been really lucky to build a great company.
It's amazing what happens when you start with something and you stick with it. A lot of, you talk about a little bit of luck, but also there's an element of perseverance and just sticking with things.
One thing that's so amazing, I'm sure you can relate to it, man, when I look back at the past 11 years, it's sort of like, if you knew everything now that you knew then, would you have gone through it again? Of course, the answer is yes, but it's like, wow. It's like knowing how much time and energy you put into building your company and your team and your culture. But a lot of the book that is about, not the 90% where we're confident and things are great. The book is actually about that 10% of the time where we lack confidence, we lack focus, we're concerned about what others think of us, we're down on ourselves. And that's where I found myself a lot, actually. Throughout the success of Lawline, I was down on myself more than I was felt good about myself. And a lot of that had to do with my mindset. And that's where the book came out of, how to stop feeling that way moving forward and actually to have more of an impact.
I think that's a really interesting sort of perspective and something that you're exploring in the book, I guess the forthcoming book. Um,
It's fun to talk like you see these people on TV shows in my book. I feel like one of those people.
yeah. Hey, man. I mean, I think when you've been doing something, they talk about doing something for 10 years, literally, or 10,000 hours, building this expertise or building a body of knowledge that really has given you a platform to think about certain things.
Yeah.
How did you navigate some of those moments, where you're doubting yourself and where you hit at least one wall, if not 100?
Yeah. So the book, the original focus of the book was how to break through your walls. And what I realized was key. And so the three core elements that I looked at of the areas where I had challenges in the past 11 years was, number one, taking action. A lot of times I didn't have confidence in myself or my decisions. And a lot of the times there was three key people in my life that's helped me take more action and have more confidence in myself. Number one is my father. He's been a mentor to me from day one. He came from nothing and built, the rags to riches story. And he's been, ever since the past 11 years, I've realized what a great resource he's been. And he's always been with me when I'm in my low moments. And like, for example, there's times where I've just been stuck in making a big decision. And he would just be there to tell me, Dave, it doesn't matter what decision you make, because in 50 years, it's not going to mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't make a decision, it's going to happen. So it's better to make the wrong decision, or whatever you quote unquote is wrong, than no decision at all. And then I've had two key coaches that have helped me through it. And coaches have been very important in my life on both elements. One was a personal executive coach. Her name is Kim Addis of Frame of Mind Coaching. And she helped me become more fearless. So we can talk about that and overcome fear. So that's the second part of it. And then the third coach, his name is Mark Green from Performance Dynamics. He coached based on the Scaling Up book and other areas. And he helped me find my focus, not only for myself, but for my business. And so the book is about how to take action, nip fear in the bud, and find your focus. And it came from those three mentors in my life.
That's great. Surrounding yourself with that network, and people talk about that a lot. And there's more conversations now. What's that emotional network that you have? Because grinding and building and doing something that most people will tell you can't be done or you shouldn't do. And I'm sure in the beginning, there's a conversation, hey, David, you have a law degree. Why aren't you going into law? So I'm sure there's an interesting poll.
Well, so it's interesting because for 5 years I worked in sales before I went to law school.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going from sales job to sales job. And it was after 9/11, actually, I was working at this company and I lived in the city and the whole experience. And I lived right near the armory where they put all the missing photos up of the 3,000 people who didn't come back. Every day I remember I'd walk through there. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, life is so precious and life is short. And I literally quit my job within a few weeks of that and didn't have another job to go back to because I was just not happy there. And I became a real estate broker. And when I was a real estate broker, I really enjoyed studying for an exam. And I enjoyed that process. I should say my dad is a personal injury attorney, and all he ever wanted me to be was an attorney. So of course it was the last thing I ever wanted to be.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can relate to that from your experience. And somehow I ended up on my own there. So yeah, it was a pretty big deal when I decided to become more of an entrepreneur than actually practice law. Luckily, I started doing this my third year of law school, and I already had success before I graduated. I knew that was I knew I needed to have some sort of success, or it'd be very hard for me not to get a job.
For sure. I think it's a pretty incredible experience, obviously out of a lot of tragedy and angst, at a societal and global level with 9/11, but this reminder on your way to work constantly of the fragility.
And let me be open and transparent too. I was very blessed and lucky that my dad had put money aside for me for school. So I don't have the debt that most people have when they graduate from college and law school. And so I appreciate that, and I recognize that. And I had a little bit more freedom to take a little bit more risk than somebody who had a lot more debt to come out of school. So even though I built it all, I was able to start, a couple steps ahead, which, a lot of people have different advantages in life.
Yeah.
I do recognize that potentially if I didn't have that advantage, I might not be here today in the position that I'm in this form.
Yeah. So while you're talking about your dad and sort of his background, it jogged my memory on a conversation we had before. The name Lawline was in the family.
Yeah. So Lawline is my dad's idea. He started a TV show in the 80s, and this is on public access.
Yeah.
This is literally before cable really existed. And he did it because he thought he was like the first, podcaster, or YouTube. It didn't exist. And then in 1999, he had the idea of taking the TV show and turning it into an education company. And within a year of he did that. He put all his energy into it. But within a year of doing that, it really didn't work out. And he went back to practicing law. And for 6 years, he didn't really do anything with it. And when I was in law school, I realized when I was doing these interviews, I was like, you know what? My dad was just ahead of his time. And I think I can do it better and cheaper and more effective. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just move on. So I was able to take the idea that he had tried but didn't work out, but never fully just threw away, because about 12 courses that still existed. So I said, as soon as I started doing this in 2006, I said, we've been around since 1999 doing this course. And no question that helped me really get a head start.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting legacy, and sort of leveraging that legacy even with the gaps. It's something actually in my work, the Godard Group, the company I'm a partner of with the leadership development work I do, was started by my mom and is still, run by her. And it's been in business for a very long time. Now it's been mostly her and a network of people. But it's given me a very big platform to take what she's done and leverage that legacy and grow that legacy.
Yeah, it's a great thing.
Even though it might be a very different version of itself than it has been over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and of course the challenge as a son of somebody who's successful and being in the same industry is, you also want to make your own mark. You want to make sure people know that this is not just an extension of them. I'm my own person. But when you have confidence in yourself, and it doesn't necessarily matter. Early on, for years, everyone just assumed I was working for my dad and doing, just doing what as an extension of him, and it was his success. And it really didn't bother me, because I was just a compliment to what I was able to build with him.
Sure.
And now it's just, my sister's been working with me for 10 years, and it's like such a blessing.
That's awesome.
To work together, and we're doing some things that are more exciting now than they were 10 years ago. So it's great to feel like a startup culture, even though it's 11 years old.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's also there's that lean nimbleness that lives in startups, and people sort of reserve for that startup experience, but can exist in organizations, even ones that have been around for a decade. Depending on how
we have suffered though.
Yeah.
You ever see the movie The Matrix?
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Well, I like to say we're like on the 4th or 5th version of The Matrix.
Yeah.
So over 11 years, maybe there's only a handful of people who've been here. We have our core team has been here 6+ years.
Yeah.
But nobody's been here except my sister, 10 years ago. And I like to say we're in the 3rd or 4th version of The Matrix. So we're doing believe it or not, we're repeating a lot of the things that we did in the 1st or 2nd version of The Matrix, except now we're just much more successful at it. But many times people here think it's the first time we're attempting that idea. I'm like, well, no, but it's cool.
Now, we've been doing this for a minute.
Yeah.
I think that brings a really great segue. How did it come up? This idea, you're in law school and you know that Lawlines is around, right? What was this?
Yeah.
What what was the inflection point or tipping point where you said, you know what, I'm going to try and do something with this? Hi all, quick break to tell you about the Founder's Mind Plus. It's all the interviews of guests you love, plus bonus episodes with additional stories and anecdotes, shoutouts and future episodes of founding funders, that could be you, and opportunities to get some cool swag from the show. You can upgrade by following the link in the show notes or go to thefoundersmind.com/plus. Thanks for following along. Back to the show.
I had two really bad experiences at law firms when I was working in law school. One, I actually got thrown out of a lawyer's office, and I realized being a lawyer was actually the same as being a salesperson if you want to be successful, except you also have to do the legal work. And I just had this like inflection point, like I wanted to control my own environment. And I also always been obsessed with entrepreneurship. And so during this whole process of controlling and doing the cameras and interviewing, the whole reason I started the TV show was I was trying to start a business within 1 year before I graduated law school. So I was obsessed with finding a way to start a business. And I saw that there were this opportunity that by the way, my dad's website was still there. It was still making about $1,000 a month, maybe $2,000 a month at most, depending on the month. So I said, if it can make any money with nobody paying attention to it, what if I just put half of my time in? I got to be able to at least double that. And so that was really what pushed me to see it. Can I at least make more than $2,000 a month, and see if I can do that. And within, I think, 4 months of doing it full time, I got it up to $10,000 in the fourth month. So I was like, okay, well, I'm on to something here.
Yeah, and $10,000 in New York back then was a lot more than it is now.
Well, especially I was the only employee.
Yeah,
I took my wife out to Grammar Street Tavern. It was the nicest restaurant in the city, and it was like a $500 meal. And I just remember thinking, and I was saying to her, I'm like, it can't get any better than this. And of course, we were just getting started, but that's how I felt.
Yeah. At that moment, it hasn't been better than that, maybe.
No, but it was just like I was on top of the world at that moment.
That's great. And I think, that idea that with very little maintenance or attention, it was already doing something. And giving, you also had that sort of self-imposed deadline, like within a year, what can I do? And within 4 months, you had some serious traction.
And it also fit some of my core values, which is it had the learning component.
Yeah.
And it had the creativity of online, interviews, which I was already doing. So it fit things that I was strong at. And of course, being a lawyer, I saw lots of opportunities of what the current content that existed at that time was just terrible. It wasn't designed for the online environment. So we created courses specifically for online viewing, not just putting a camera in the back of a 400-person seminar.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A big distinction in the shift in how we documented things. You mentioned earlier, that you've had your fair share of, I don't know if you said breakdowns, I don't know the exact language, but what are some of the bigger ones that come to mind, and how did you navigate them?
Yeah. So the biggest wall that I faced was in leadership. And I'm sure, in your line of business, you can understand that.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you the theme. In a 6-year period, I went through 3 COOs.
Okay.
And it was 2 years, 2 years, and 2 years. And each COO failed for different reasons that the relationship failed, but ultimately came back to the same fundamental issues from me. So the first one I ended up firing because the sales team was stealing from us, and either he had to know or he just was not paying attention. Either way, it was under his watch, and I knew it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. The second one was somebody who I'm still close with today that we essentially just lost trust with each other, and he felt like Lawline was holding him back, and he just left after we couldn't work well together. The third one, we never built trust from the beginning. And we knew it, and we just still kept it a go. And ultimately what I realized was the main component that was missing in these relationships was, well, number one was lack of confidence in myself and my decisions. But number two, and this was the important part, there was no clear focus. There's no clear accountability. There's no clear structure. We had no real planning. And so there was nothing I was doing that was holding that person accountable. And so what ended up happening was, to be honest, we had two CEOs. And so we would both be competing to lead the companies. And after the third COO, and every time one of them would leave, it was so painful because I had to restart everything. I had to rebuild it up. And it was like really like the lowest moments I've had, because if I couldn't get through them, the company would, I thought, disappear.
Yeah.
And it's what led to, after the third CEO, I felt myself going through the same exact thing that I swore to myself I wouldn't do again. That's when I hired my third coach, Mark Green, and we started creating structure and process into our company. And then for 3 years, we completely changed the foundation. We didn't need another COO until 2018 in July. Somebody who's been with me for 6 years. We realized we were ready to rebuild the CEO concept. And now I'm what's considered the visionary in the company, and she is the integrator in the company to help integrate my ideas so I don't overwhelm the company with, I have 1,000 ideas a day, to make sure only the right ones get through.
The plight of the entrepreneur, the sheer amount of ideas. So you just mentioned the visionary and integrator. This is a reference to the entrepreneurial operating system?
Correct. When I read that book, I read the book because I know that I have a mentor, an entrepreneur mentor. I have many mentors who I was telling him all my issues. He's like, oh my God, you just need an integrator. I'm like, an what? And he goes, here's this book, Rocket Fuel. And the thing is, I read the book in a day. And after I put the book down, here's how I felt. I felt like I've been sick my entire life. I've gone to 18 different doctors, and nobody could diagnose me or what was wrong with me. And finally, I read this book. It was like going to a specialist, and he said, nothing's wrong with you. You're just a visionary. Because I always thought the fact that I didn't like holding people accountable, the fact that I was all over the place, the fact that I thought everything was always going to be easy. All these things I thought were my weaknesses, and something was wrong with me. It just turns out, I was not alone. I'm more of a typical visionary and a leader. So I was able to embrace that role a lot more, and I just needed the right integrator to help me through it. And so right away, I started rebuilding the leadership structure in our company, which wasn't easy again to set this up.
I think that's such an amazing moment, and that's a great analogy. Being sick for years and having gone to a bunch of doctors, and then finally finding someone where it's like this little tweak. And there's a line that I really appreciate from another coach, Bob Dunham, and he said, awareness creates choice. And, I think about that with the conversations I have on the show, the books I read, even the work that I do with clients. You're learning all of these new things. And you said this earlier in the conversation, right? That teaching is a great way to learn, and just learning in general is such a powerful place to be. And all of a sudden you have a new language or framework, and everything changes.
Yeah, it's that's why I love books. That's why I am obsessed with finding the right books in my life. Is the best ROI you're going to get from anything you ever do. And like I said, Rocket Fuel came from a book, and then I was able to, I got coaches to help me implement it afterwards. But there's been several key books in my life that have completely changed who I am as a person and a professional. That is unbelievable. And that's why my message to everybody is just, I always buy more books than I need. And if I start a book and I don't finish it, okay. Either the book could have been done in a paragraph or a chapter, or it just wasn't the right book for me. But I spend so much time and energy trying to find the right books. And so I agree with you. I always search for those right concepts. And that's why, again, in my book, I think what I've done is I've distilled some of the best concepts that I've learned over the past 15 years into a very simple, easy to use book that's not a very long book too. So I'm hoping it will have an impact on other people.
Such an important part with books is the accessibility, right? You might have the most incredible concept or framework or, set of practices, but if it's heady, unattainable, inaccessible, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. As a Shah, I think I know what makes a good book. And for me, I think it's the combination of principles and stories.
Yeah.
And too much principles, you lose me.
What's something that you learned recently that blew your mind or surprised you?
Recently, from a mindset strategy.
Let's call it anything.
Let's see. I've learned a lot because I've been to a lot of different events. Okay, I'm going to share something very cool. So I saw this guy, Jerry O'Brien, speak. He was the marketing person. He now is a motivational speaker and a brand builder. He helps you build a lot of brands. And he worked for Coors. And what he talked about was he was doing the marketing for Coors, and they were trying to figure out how to sell more beer. And so they put together this whole marketing strategy. And they came up with this concept that was just brilliant. And it really got you thinking on how you can change things in your life. And what they did all this research on customers, and they came up with 4 things that customers like. And one of them was cold. They want cold, cool, refreshing beer, right? Cold was important to them. So what did they do? They took every beer can has lining. It has special lining in it. Do you know why a beer can has lining in it?
I don't.
Because if you don't have the lining in it, the beer will corrode the tin, and it'll open up, make holes in it.
Yeah.
So you need a lining to protect the can. So they all have linings, and every single beer can have lining in it. So what do? They decided we're going to make that lining blue. And we're going to tell everybody we have blue lining in our cans to keep it cool. They didn't tell everybody that everybody has linings in their cans. They just said we have blue linings in it. The guys who had to build it said, "Are you guys crazy? Absolutely not. We're not going to do it." Finally, they convinced them to do it. They put it on there. That blue lining led to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue because they started telling people they have a blue lining that didn't do anything differently, zero, than any other lining in another can. And then, of course, they built on that. They started creating these things where you, on the cans, sort of like, remember those old gloves where you rub them and they're frosty freezies or whatever, and like when they get cold, it changes colors or whatever.
Yeah, the cans change colors.
So that they said, okay, let's do this on the can. So when it's cold enough, you'll know. And that worked. And they started building on that. And so what I learned, to me, what was super interesting is it's perception, and it's doing research of what's important. And that helps move things forward. And everybody was against it along the way, saying, no, no, no. And now all the operations people are like, okay, what's your next idea? What's your next idea? And so I just always think about the blue lining that wasn't any different and didn't make any difference to the coolness, but ended up selling hundreds of millions of dollars more in beer.
Yeah, it's the new silver lining. David, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know you're up to a lot. You're working on a lot. We didn't even talk about your entrepreneurial work with the entrepreneurial organization. So maybe that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But what's a good way? I know you got this book coming out. I know you're always working on it sounds at least 3 things. What's a great way for people to follow along, to check in on what you're up to, maybe to hear about when this book is actually available?
Yeah, so I'm super open on LinkedIn. I'm actually putting a lot of content on LinkedIn and also Facebook. I got to get to Instagram, but one of the things I'm actually doing is creating more of a video-based series of content that's out there. But I would say connect with me on LinkedIn, and it's the best way to stay in touch because you'll get my content, and my name will be on here. So just go on LinkedIn and reach out to me.
Cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show, and thanks for sharing some of the things that you're learning.
Thank you, and I really look forward to our next conversation, where I've learned a lot here too, and I've really enjoyed speaking to you. And hopefully the next conversation maybe we'll be in person together.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Founder's Mind. Check back weekly for full episodes. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for The Founder's Mind Plus for 2 to 4 bonus episodes each month in addition to the full episodes and other dope benefits. Sign up for The Founder's Mind Plus through the episode notes or by going to thefoundersmind.com and clicking the plus link. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of the show, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at The Founder's Mind. Last but not least, thank you to Roy Matz for the music on this show and his dope editing skills that make The Founder's Mind possible. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark, Founder's Mind is what you see.